action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chin-wag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today I've caught Colin Lewis. Arguably Ireland's greatest marketer, and more highly decorated than a Christmas tree on Dublin's Grafton Street, Colin's vast experience and multiple industry awards come from a career that includes work at iconic brands like BMI, 118118, Thomas Cook and CityJet. He's worked all over the world, including Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, Indonesia, the UK and Ireland. And he's not just content with winning awards, he also judges them. He's a speaker, lecturer and teacher, educating brands such as Unilever, Facebook, Ryanair and Heineken, and is currently the CMO at Open Jaw Technologies. Colin is also the founder of DMX Dublin, the largest digital marketing conference in Ireland, and still finds time to write a column for Marketing Week, author e-commerce reports and race motorcars. Colin says, customers will go where they want. The choice is theirs. These barriers we put in front of them are our choice and make a joke of the words customer experience. Welcome to the show, Colin.
Good afternoon. How are you? Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Yeah, very well. Delighted to talk, Colin.
Yeah, it's going to be great fun.
Good. Well, let's start with our 7 quick-fire questions, Colin. Mac or PC?
PC all the way.
The Drum or Campaign?
Ooh, tough. The Drum.
Café Rouge or Eau Rouge?
Eau Rouge every day.
North side or south side?
Oh, I'm north side originally, but I live on the south side. So let's say I've got a leg and foot in both counts.
Ryanair or Aer Lingus?
Aer Lingus.
Cannes or Le Mans?
Cannes.
And finally, 5G or 4MGs?
The latter, obviously. For reasons that will become everybody will become aware of shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did it all start for you, Colin? What was your first job and what was your first marketing job?
Well, my very first marketing job was my very first job. I'd studied marketing in university, and I had the ill luck to leave university in the late 80s. And when there was a lot less marketing jobs than there are today, a lot less choice. And so my very first job was the decidedly unglamorous world of aluminium sheeting and aluminium extrusions, where I started as a marketing assistant. And I lasted all of, I think it was 7 weeks, because I had the ill luck to be hired the day, 2 weeks before the chief exec of 25 years got the sack. And he was the only one who knew why I was there. And as they gave me my check as I left, they said, I don't know what you were hired for, but here's a check. And it was for £156 as my redundancy check. I can remember it distinctly. It was the happiest day of my life. It was probably the most money I'd ever seen.
Downhill since then.
It's been all, ask me anything about extrusions, I'm all over it.
So what happened then? What happened then after that 7 weeks and check?
I obviously was delighted to leave that job because it wasn't saying what I was made out for. But I started working for a company which is kind of a conglomerate of individual consumer brands, B2B brands. I started as a marketing assistant. I did everything from deliver jams and marmalades to retail outlets to dealing with Marks and Spencers in Paris and all sorts of things. So it was a really good training. And then I threw it all in and emigrated to Australia and lived there for 8 years between Australia and Asia and all around the world, and worked for Thomas Cook. So yeah, it was a big leap.
And how did it differ in Australia?
Well, I was a very young, innocent whippersnapper, and suddenly at the age of whatever age it was, 25, I had a job where it included a view over Sydney Harbour. And I was like, clenched fist, the fist in the air going, I finally made it. and big budgets, cross-country campaigns, cross-continent campaigns, and it was just a totally different world. It's where I grew up and became an adult. Is the best way to put it. And became a real marketer. Yeah, it was great times. Great times.
And were there other factors that took you to Australia, or was it literally to take that role?
No, God, no. I arrived with €200 and one telephone, or $200 and one telephone number. So I just did it from scratch. I did have the far side on this, though, and this is for any you young people out there thinking about stuff. Do play a long game. I actually did apply for an Australian visa. I did think about it all, and I planned it for 2 years. So I was thinking ahead, even at the age of 23, which is, most people who know me would find that quite astounding, but I do actually think ahead, and it was amazing. And actually, one point came from that as I was thinking through some of the things I might say. I did not get lucky. I had a selection of crappy jobs in Australia, but eventually I got lucky because I was thorough. I think it was the 200th job I applied for. It was the Thomas Cook job. So by the time I got to that interview, I was all over it and I was on fire. So that's what I say to young people, which is, looking for career in marketing. It may not happen day one, door two, door three, door four, but you might need to get to open the door 12, and by then you'll be ready.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. You talk about, in fact, in a recent article on LinkedIn about marketing education needing to change. So would you still encourage younger people listening to pursue marketing education, and you're merely remarking that it needs to update itself or become a bit more relevant to the real world of marketing? Or do you encourage people to literally go out and try anything?
I say do the education. Now, does that mean you have to do 3 years of an undergraduate degree in marketing? No, not necessarily. But let me explain my context here, is that I did an undergraduate degree and then I did a postgraduate. And then 10 or 15 years later, I did an MBA. And actually, when I was in the middle of the MBA, I decided to double down on my existing marketing knowledge. And subsequent to the MBA, I realized if I just observed what I was doing, I was basically trapped in this world of tactics. I didn't really know, the world of strategy correctly. And what I say now is you must do the bare minimum of 1 or 2 years really detailed marketing training, because you do not have the language, you do not have the vocabulary, and you just fall into this world of tactics. And how do I know? Because I was that person. That is exactly what I was like. To be a modern day marketer, you must have the basics. Now, as it happens, over the next couple of weeks, I'm teaching strategy and marketing strategy to a number of classes, a number of companies again. And I went back to basics again and reread everything that I thought I knew and went and said, I'm missing that as well. So what I say to people is you must get the basics done. I don't mind what your undergraduate degree is, but you have to study marketing. And I have no time for anybody who says, sure, anybody can do that, because that's what gives us all a bad name.
And really, it's probably fair to say that the strategic principles remain fairly timeless. It's the tactical tools that constantly evolve and are updated.
Well, I think that the phrase I wrote was something like, strategies change sometimes, tactics change quite a lot. But strategy rarely changes. Yeah? Strategy is something you're doing over. In fact, right now I'm doing a strategic rethink of everything I've done for the last 3 years here in OpenJaw. But the core strategy has been the same. We've just got better with the execution over the last couple of years, but the strategy hasn't changed. Now we're going back to a bit of zero-based thinking, and we're throwing out the strategy and going, is this where we start now? Or, is it good enough? Is it fit for purpose for the future? So, like, even me with my experience and my knowledge, I'm still going, I've got to come back to strategy. I've got to keep coming back to strategy, because you can get lazy very quickly.
And do you think you realised that and subsequently did the MBA to plug that gap, or was it during the process of your MBA you realised that perhaps you had been chasing tactics?
I'd like to go and claim I had lots of insight beforehand, but no, it wasn't like that at all. Where it really kind of came to the fore was very simple. I remortgaged my house to do the MBA, 30 grand. Yeah. And wow. In the middle of the MBA, it was like, I can hear myself saying to myself, sure, I know this, and I know this. And it was the moment where I went and said, stop kidding yourself. Just stop believing your own stuff. And I say this to everybody. Once you hear yourself saying, no, I got that, that's when your learning is over. You have to keep saying to yourself, no, what if I don't know this? What if I really don't know this at a granular level? And it was the moment I decided to do that, which was admit to myself, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I just need to be on a constant learning curve. Well, then that's when everything started improving for me. And the specific part to that, then a couple of years after the MBA, I started teaching. And it was when you start teaching, do you realize, oh, there's more gaps here than a Swiss cheese in some of my knowledge.
So how did teaching change your understanding of marketing and your skill sets?
So if you haven't done any teaching or presenting your ideas, what I say to everybody listening here is the way to become good at anything, and it doesn't matter whether it's golf or marketing or race car driving, the way to become good is to try and teach somebody else that skill. The way to become good is to try and teach what you have to somebody else. And it doesn't matter, as I say, regardless of how trivial it is, because that is when you have to start having coherent ideas that are within a framework that somebody else can understand. And the more you do that, the better you become and the more you understand your discipline. And I would say if you imagine a curve which was kind of fairly flat for a long period of time and then just suddenly turns up exponentially towards the end, that metaphor I'm using there is how I apply my own thinking about marketing, which was pretty good, start teaching, and then the curve just went straight upwards. And so it's not a set of half-baked concepts in your mind. It's a solid base of concepts you understand, which you can then apply and communicate to senior management, you can communicate to team, you can communicate to staff with the ground on your feet being pretty solid.
So with that in mind, how can everyone listening become better marketers? I mean, you wrote, just to cite another one of your recent articles, you wrote a great piece recently about the importance of asking the right questions rather than having the right answers.
Yeah, well, the first point to call is admit to yourself that maybe you don't know everything. Okay, because we are all a series of biases. I'm sure we'll have to talk about biases later, but the first thing is, admit that you don't know everything. Okay, and then the second thing is, as I wrote in that article, it's like we're always looking for solutions, whereas in fact, maybe it's keep asking, start getting to a situation where you can ask the right question. Because if you don't have the right question, the answers are going to be fairly muddled, or they're going to be incoherent or not applicable. And people jump into solution mode with questioning all the time. And what they're trying to do then, what happens then is you simply reinforce ideas that are already there. And no new ideas or mindsets or insights are going to come from that. And of course, we all want our ideas to be reinforced. But actually, the super skill of being a marketer is going, maybe my opinion is not relevant here. Maybe it's the correct questions I need to do it. And I actually, even in the article, talk about how to become a better questioner, which is by doing so, you become, it builds a virtuous circle because you're asking empowering questions and why questions. And why did this campaign work? Let's look at the data. What if questions and how might we questions?
You touched on something there which I think is key, which is maybe my opinion doesn't necessarily matter in this instance, or isn't certainly the right starting point.
In 100% of the cases when I'm doing my classes, within 5 minutes, and I'm talking about a concept, and within 5 minutes at the start of the class, somebody puts up their hand and says, well, I don't do that, or I don't believe that, or, my opinion is this. And then it's kind of a setup because I know it's going to happen because I've seen it so often. And then I go and say, what you need to understand is your opinion is totally irrelevant. And keep saying it to yourself. And I write it on the board and I ham it all up. But basically, your opinion is totally irrelevant. As a marketer, your role is to look inside the other person's mind and to be market orientated. Your opinion is totally irrelevant.
Do you see people making that mistake across businesses? Do you see marketers making that mistake regardless of their seniority?
We're walking around with this kind of wall in front of us, or sort of like glass in front of us that's kind of darkened glass, or you can't see through it. Where it's basically you're walking around thinking my opinions are relevant, my opinions count in this context here. And it basically acts as a blocker for you to actually see the true situation of what's really going on. I quote in the article that in the future, it won't be about what you know, but the quality of questions you ask that will be the most important. Because what we're always doing is filtering everything through an existing frame of reference. And if you don't have good quality questions, it's your existing frame of reference will just keep getting reinforced. So you have got to always look out for, is this my opinion here, or is this a fact or an insight I'm building out here? And I have a fun story on this one, which is it's kind of like, and I do this in the classes as well. If somebody came to you, and I do this, I say, so I ask a person maybe in a couple of front rows, and I say, what sort of car do you want to have? And they say a BMW or a Toyota. And I say, well, I've got four MGs, 4MG cars, all in various states of disrepair. And how come you don't have an MG? Because I have an MG. You should have an MG. Isn't that true? Why would you have a BMW when you could have an MG? And they look at me as though I'm just a total idiot, which of course I'm hamming it up for the audience, but it's basically to show if somebody came to you and said, I have this type of car, you should have that type of car, you're having the wrong type of car, they would just think they're an idiot. Well, that's what happens when people talk about their opinions, which is they say, well, I think nobody watches linear television, daytime television, or whatever, BBC One, BBC Two. Nobody does that anymore. No, you don't, but the majority of people do. Yeah, everybody's on Twitter. No, they're not. Yeah, everybody's on Facebook. No, they're not. Yeah, just because you are. Okay, as the moment you hear yourself saying, well, I think, what you got to do is think of Colin going, I've got four MGs. How come you don't?
Yeah, great example. And does that always happen in lesson one with Colin?
No, it's always within 5 minutes. It was after like 5 or 10 years of teaching, you start seeing some patterns, and it's like, oh, that's your opinion. Okay. I said, well, let me tell you about my four MGs. And they just looked at me going, who is this idiot? What's he on about? And I'm doing a class over the next few days. I could pretty much guarantee that's going to happen within the first 10 minutes of the time. So it's as a professional marketer, your opinions are irrelevant.
It's just as well it does come up within 5 minutes, or certainly lesson one, because it is the fundamental state of mind that you have to take in order to then look at building a marketing strategy. So for anyone listening who's unsure how best to do it, how can people become market oriented? Is it just literally that state of mind? Let's just empty our heads of what we think we know and start filling it with research?
It's a great question. People have different ways of doing the same thing. As long as it's under the umbrella of what we'll loosely call market orientation, go and approach it the best way you can. But before that, the first thing is to understand what strategy is. And Richard Rummel talks about this in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. He says, strategy is designing a way to deal with the challenge. Strategy is designing a way to deal with the challenge. And your strategy is a coherent set of analysis, concepts, and policies that respond to a challenge. So you work out what the challenge is, and then you combine the analysis and the concepts and the actions that you need to go and do that. So you start for that basis all the time. That's where the start of market orientation is. Now, that's pretty hard because it's hard to know where to start in the whole thing, but that is the starting position, devising the strategy and understanding how to win and where to play. So typically, now here's how I do it, and I'm doing this as I say because I'm devising a new 3-year plan at the moment. I throw everything out that I know, observe what I'm saying about what I currently believe in my own head, and say, could I challenge that? And then I look at all the competitors, put that through a filter of what they're saying, what they're doing, and say, is that better or worse than what I'm thinking about? Why do I say it's better or worse? What's my reaction to that? Then I go to third-party analysis and say, do I believe that with that in mind? Now we've seen what competitors are doing. And then I come together and obviously I talk to the existing team, talk to management, and I combine that to an overall model. But what I do is, though, I wouldn't put a touch there, is I do look at companies brands who I admire. They could be FMCG brands, they could be Silicon Valley brands, they could be B2B brands. And I look at and go, they've got a lot more firepower. They've got a lot more brain power working on their brands than I do. So what can I learn from that?
That's a good point, actually, in terms of brain power and I suppose in terms of resource. So our side, we have the luxury of working with startups and small businesses all the way up to large enterprises. And strategy is understandably a significant thing for all, but is it less significant the smaller you are?
Well, I have some particular skin in this game. Obviously, I've worked for brands like Thomas Cook, who've been around 170 years at this stage. I've worked for startups, and I've worked for businesses that were in turnaround, like what we were trying to do for BMI. Literally, in the last year, I've also taken money out of my own pocket and invested in an e-commerce startup. And what I've noticed, and I couldn't really put a coherent kind of frame of reference around this. I couldn't really get my ideas together on this till I started investing my own money and started counting, if you will, the dollars and cents, pounds, shillings, and pence that I put into it. And I realized that we're in marketing, we're surrounded by all the big brands with the big budgets. And what we hear about these big brands and big budgets all the time. And all the Colin Lynches and all the articles, all the Harvard Business Review case studies, they're around those big brands. And where in the SME world, you're hoping to make payroll. Right? You're not worried about strategy. You're just literally hoping to make payroll and make payment to the biggest supplier over the following couple of months. And it's survival is what their notion is. The idea of brand building and so on, and creating big brand campaigns, it's out of the picture because you'd be broke. Okay, so I think there's a dichotomy there where. I'm sure for listeners there, they must have felt a little bit of that going, in my business, this thinking about strategy, is it really 100% relevant? So where I have now is a slightly different take on it. Your strategy is still relevant. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It doesn't have to be, something written on 5 or 6 pages. It can be something very simple, which is we are going to build sales overnight, brand over time. We're going to use direct response. And we're going to use even some of Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow thinking, which is we're going to focus on fame as a strategy. And it can be as simple as that. Small brands have some challenges, but they're very different to big brands. So you've got to actually maybe don't drink the big brand Kool-Aid when it comes to being a small brand.
Yeah, we're linking that back to an earlier point about marketing education. Is that a concern we should have in terms of column inches and in fact, in this instance, the marketing textbooks, which typically would be more a reflection of big brands rather than the reality? I mean, the reality is that 99% of businesses in the UK are qualified as small businesses.
All businesses essentially are small businesses, no matter what way you put it. And it turns out the stats, I did the stats for the States, I did the stats for Australia and the stats for Europe. It's 95% plus of all businesses are small. Okay. Mm. The big difference, however, from when I started my career before is the tools and capabilities and the platforms are now sort of democratized for these SME businesses. Whereas, say 20 years ago, you might be able to get out the door with a radio campaign, a couple of print ads in the newspaper if you're a small business. Now, of course, you can build a business from scratch purely on Facebook advertising. You can build a business from scratch purely on search engine optimization. So the opportunity really is with big businesses. I wrote a really detailed note on direct-to-consumer businesses, and I'm really direct-to-consumer brands, I should say, and I really got involved in the detail of that. And I looked at this particular case study of a brand called Hubble, I think it is, who do glasses and who do contact lenses. And they built the business for the first year purely on Facebook advertising. That's never existed in the history of, literally in the history of marketing, the history of business. And I can take one channel and get to 10 million within a year or two. If they'd followed the strategy textbook, that's in William J. Stanton's book, or Kotler or anything like that, they would never have done that. Yeah, they went and said, what I need is sales overnight, brand over time, and I need direct response. And I'll use PR maybe to develop a little bit of PR out there. In fact, Byron Sharp writes about this. He says, a lot of small businesses think their job is to tell the world why they should buy from them. It sounds a little bit like brand to me. But the biggest battle for small businesses, especially those starting out, is people who don't know who you are and don't know how to buy from you. And these new tools, these new platforms enable you to get the name in front of them and enable you to buy from you. So that's why I kind of go, when I see the case studies and I see these big brands, I'm like, you can't follow it religiously particularly if you want to stay in business.
Yeah, it's not the most efficient route, and certainly in that instance for Hubble. Do you believe that's essentially why it worked then? It was that huge reach that they had on via Facebook advertising.
It was also the fact that they could measure everything through. Now, as I say, I have skin in this game. I've invested in a business that's a fairly boring, bland, middle of the road product that's essentially commoditized, and it's an e-commerce business. And we're following pretty much the same strategy, which is we're focusing on SEO, we're focusing on AdWords, and we're focusing on Facebook advertising and keeping a decent CPA and a decent CPC. And next year, however, we may go and use more visual assets, but the chances of us going on television or taking a full page ad out in more orthodox channels like the newspapers or whatever is zero, because it's just too much risk for the business. Every single dollar has to count. So that's why I say, we have to be realistic as marketers. Not everything's one size fits all. We still have done the segmentation, we still have done the targeting, we still have done the positioning, we still invested in great design, we're still focused on activation, but we don't go and say our strategy is to create the biggest brand. No, we go and say the brand is developed, sales overnight, brand over time, to this segment, with this targeting and with this positioning.
And essentially, it's making it easy for people to buy, isn't it? I mean, you regularly use the word friction, and it's something you've talked about numerous times. And in truth, it's part of the reasons I started reading all of your articles with Marketing Week. What I love so much about it is it's such a simple concept. It's fair to say it probably goes hand in hand with Ehrenberg Bass and Byron Sharp and his motley crew regarding mental and physical availability. But that idea that friction exists everywhere and it's a case of removing it is very true.
The friction reward thing, I find it just fascinating. There's an author called Richard Hammond who's written Smart Retail. And I picked up his book and I read the first 3 chapters. And not only did I love the first 3 chapters, I went and hired him to be a speaker at a conference I was organizing, and I'm getting him again because it's the way he articulates the word friction, and you realize, we're surrounded by friction everywhere. You can get away with friction if you've got what I call a lock on your customers. Yeah, if you have a situation whereby they've no real choice whether to go anything else, and I'm really talking about the energy companies, the banks, the telcos, whatever. They can create all the friction you like. But the you and me running our FMCG brand, our e-commerce brand, when switching costs are marginal, then you can't create any friction. And now I see the world through this lens of friction and reward the whole time, and I can see it in front of me. Let me give you an example. So we were setting up this a couple of years ago. I had the task of setting up the business bank account for the e-commerce business. I was the one who was told, you go do that. I walk into the bank and I say, I'd like to set up a business bank account. I've been in this particular branch with my account for 32 years. So I really want to bring the business here as well. The next thing that happened in the next 5 seconds was, here's the 25-page form I've got to fill out. It's handed over to me. Fill in that form, I'll come back to you. And I said, I don't fill in forms. Yeah. And she's like, well, you have to fill in the form. I'm like, you've got 32 years of history. You know more about my finances than I know about my finances.
Yeah.
And you still have to fill in the form. And I said, I don't have to do anything. You don't understand. I don't have to do anything. And I walked out the door and I went across the road and I phoned my sister up, actually, who just set up a business, a bank account. And I said, can you introduce me to those guys? But you have to say these following words. I don't fill in forms, to her. And she said, yeah, come up. And I went in. 10 minutes later, I walked out. And all that business, the hundreds of thousands of pounds of that business has now gone to another bank because they created friction. So the lens, like one of the takeouts from this particular podcast is, I want people to walk around the world going, is this friction? Who's causing this friction? Why are we causing this friction? Are we just doing it for legacy reasons? How can I create reward, even mini rewards, right through a booking process, right through a purchase process? It's just a fantastic lens to view the world through.
Well, fun enough, Rory Sutherland made a similar point on our episode with him about how marketers tend to be obsessed with anything that is additive. We're always looking to add things, but actually removing something like removing friction in an e-commerce process is overlooked. But why? It makes so much sense.
Well, there's a funny thing with this one, which is I ran $100 million euro e-commerce website in 2006. So I've been running a lot of websites for years. And the problem is you're kind of incentivized to create friction if you want to upsell and cross-sell. So we have a problem, which is, as Steve Krug writes in the book called Don't Make Me Think, in websites and most things, we don't want the customer to think because it creates cognitive load, okay? And that's what Steve Krug says. It's a brilliant encapsulation of what the problem is for friction. Don't make me think. But if you look at any airline website out there and most e-commerce websites, they're kind of incentivized to keep upselling you and cross-selling you and sort of, if you will, force you to get involved in friction, because the what's called the attach rate of these things is a lot of revenue for them. If an airline sells an insurance policy, that's a lot of revenue for them. If a clothing retailer online gets you to buy socks or shoes or whatever it is, as in addition to the shirt and trousers you already bought, it's a really high upsell. So you have to observe friction, but within the context of, is this actually personalizing the experience for the customer correctly, or am I just trying to create friction for the sake of it that I could cut out?
Yes, that's a good point, actually. They're two different things. Is it fair to say that, I don't know, Amazon's one-click purchase is a good example of removing friction?
I would say the best in the world is Booking.com. These guys are just insane. I sat through a presentation from the folks in Booking.com last week at a conference in London, a big travel conference in London. And the guy was clearly 5 times smarter than anybody else in his panel session. And the level of insane data and tests and tens of thousands of A/B testing they're running at any one time means that as a marketer, the people you need to look at about the friction reward game is Booking. Every single copy, every single pixel counts on the page.
And it's valid in offline experiences also, customer service, etc.
Well, I've got this collection of kind of like things that make me angry as I walk around the world. And friction is one of them, and being turning into a grumpy old man. But one of the things that again, it's a bit of fun, but it's also true. So if I'm a guy and I want to go buy some clothes, okay. What's the situation in almost every sort of department store? The men's clothing is downstairs or on the second floor or the third floor, and you got to go look for it. Yeah. And you know what happens? You get in 10 feet and you say, this looks like too much like hard work. I'll turn back around and forget that. And so even these small little things, I mean, the amount of times I go, you know what I do? I'll go and get that shirt or whatever. And then I go, this is so much like hard work. This is cute. You know what? I'll go back online. Whereas for women's clothing, and it's always on the same ground floor, it's easy to find, and it's just like, So as I say, it's a personal hang up. It's got no basis in reality or common sense whatsoever. But that's, as I said, because I see the world of this fiction reward stuff. I think I'd have shelled out a lot more money at clothing if I could just get to the place in the shop, But now I'm like, forget it. Marks and Spencer's third floor. Hey, doing that.
Yeah, just let me spend my money.
Yeah.
I'm like that with queues. We're surrounded by sandwich shops here in Wokingham, and I can see the queues from my window. And if there's a queue, I just can't even do it. I tell you, but it is often the trivial things, isn't it? It's the small detail that can be significant. So one of my pet hates is wobbly tables in pubs and restaurants. I just can't stand it.
Yeah, the problem is now is you're I can see it sensed already. You're turning into a grumpy old man, Giles. And this is just keep going the whole time. It's going to escalate. It's kind of like, remember I talked about the curve that just kind of exponentially grows. That's what happens. You start going, get off my land.
I think the curve was a few years ago, mate, to be honest. But I'm often told that.
It's very interesting, though. It's just what I would say to people listening, then just use this lens, just like we were talking about strategy, we were talking about education earlier. Just think, are we just creating friction for the sake of it? Or is it because it's some policy that is handed by a lawyer? If you're a passionate marketer, it's your role, your responsibility to get rid of that. It's really just, it's the thing. In fact, I'll give you a story. So I was working a good few years ago Actually, it was one of the first jobs I had, and I had to deliver the aforementioned jams and marmalades around the supermarkets. Okay? It was a very good experience. I hated it at the time, and then I went, this is a good experience, yeah. And I remember my boss coming to me going, "So, Colin, what is it? Is it why are we not shifting product here? Like, is it the brand? Is it the taste? What is the label?" And I'm like, "No, they can't find it in the shop." And she's, no, it's not that. I was like, no, they can't find it in the shop. And I have to say, that particularly funny experience, I'd say, has been around maybe 20%, 30% of any success I've had in my career is just get the product in front of the punters. You never know. They might put their hand in their pocket. That's it. That's my marketing strategy success right there. Get it in front of the punters. It turns out Byron Sharp has codified that and turned it into a book, but I wasn't that smart.
Well, it is all based on that, isn't it? Is that mental, physical availability?
When I read that first, whenever it was a couple of years ago, I was like, "Oh, you mean getting stuff in front of people?" Oh, who knew? Yeah. And in fact, I was working in Australia, and I had an amazing job in Thomas Cook. It was literally a dream job, okay. And then, but I had this passion to go and work in the music business because I was a music fanatic when I was a teenager, and just like, this is what I want to do. So I got a job in a very well-known music brand, is the best way to put it. And I was the head of classics and jazz, all these big brands. And at the launch, a very famous singer in Australia. And we got him into top 30 in the charts when charts were important and all the rest of it. And here's how I did it. It's as simple as this. I went and said, "I want you to play this particular song in the shop. And I want you to make sure we buy all the end aisles so people can shop it. And I want the sales guys to go in and tell them that this is this guy and to give them incentives to do it." Now, you might kind of say, "Well, Colin, that's kind of what everybody's doing." Well, you would be amazed. I sounded like Moses had come down from the mountain with the stele, with the stuff carved in stone, and they were like, "God, you're a guru." And it's like, really? Can people? So it's one of the things I go and say. People don't think of some of the stuff like mental availability, physical availability. It's like a thing everybody now knows, but it's been around for 50 years, and it's pretty bloody obvious. You can build a whole career on that. That's what I did.
Talking about experience then, you had a time as European marketing director at 118. Now, during your time there were some iconic ads that came out. So what was that like, and what made those ads so great?
Well, the little bit of background is the bit that makes it even more intriguing, okay? Because first of all, the original idea of the two runners came about in around 2003, and a couple of people claim to have had the original idea, but when I did some background checking on it, it was as with many things, it was a combination of things that came together. But the very interesting point was they deregulated directory inquiries, and one particular guy in New York spent 2 million quid just to get that number. Okay, and 3 years later, he did the same thing in France. He spent 2 million quid to get a number. And then he did the same in Ireland, and he did the same in Switzerland. Okay, and then the runners idea came through, and they did. It was Byron Sharp through and through. The physical and mental availability, never changing from the core message. Using the core message till you were sick of it, and so it's very interesting. So then I get to be involved in it, and it turns out many of the marketing, all the campaigns across Europe, France, Switzerland, and Ireland, they have runners in them. Slightly different numbers, but they have runners in them. And then I have to start shooting the television campaigns. And each year we would refresh the TV campaigns. And it was a very strict edict all the time. Do not mess with the number. The word, Colin, is pack shot. Pack shot is the word. And we want to be able to see the 118, or in the case of France, 118, we want to see that from second one. Not like a reveal at the end of the 30-second ad. No. The ad has to be seen, the brand has to be seen from second one. And so the concept of pack shot, which I'd kind of vaguely known before, was drilled into my head. And it wasn't clever, it wasn't smart, it wasn't beautiful, but boy, did it make a lot of money. The number, I know when I was working there, the amount of money that the gentleman who'd invested 2 million quid originally in 2003, I know how much money he earned from it, and it was 9 figures, not 6 figures, it was 9 figures, and a mid 9 figures he made just from having that one insight, which is, let's go buy these numbers, let's have ads that drill home the number, and let's not mess with the packaging, let's not mess with anything, let's just get it out there. And then eventually we moved the strategy on from ads to pure sponsorship, because obviously the top of mind was there, and what we were trying to do is just keep unaided top of mind going the whole time. So yeah, I actually have a great story there. I was shooting the campaign, first day, 8 o'clock, big TV crew, big crew, 6 months of work, lots of iteration, and there we are in Enfield, North London, 8 o'clock in the morning, the day of the riots in Enfield. Yeah, so yeah, we got it done. It was a fun thing. So yeah, the best laid plans of a lot of mice and men. So yeah, another outtake for everybody here is you may want to have to take on your agency here, because they don't want to hear pack shot. They don't want to hear the beautiful piece of creative with the reveal at the end, or they want to hear the beautiful piece of creative with the reveal at the end. But I say, think about probably one of the world's most iconic brands ever. Whatever you think about the brand, you have to admit that Marlboro is one of the world's most iconic brands. And I'd say 99% of all Marlboro ads had the pack shot. So that's the image I'd like to leave in your mind. If you want to get a brand across, to get physical and mental availability, you've got to think in terms of, where's my pack shot in all communications? And just think about it from the customer's perspective. He's not lying awake at night thinking about 118. He's not lying awake at night thinking about Marlboro. Well, they might be thinking about their cigarettes. It's a totally different thing. But they're not lying awake at night thinking about your brand. So their first the first item on the list is always, do we have physical and mental availability? And can we use that through what I call inverted commas, pack shot thinking?
Yeah, do you think agencies are, or many agencies are loath to go that route because there's too many people that perceive themselves as, I don't know, artists or something? They're too ashamed to just go the pack shot route? Because you're right, it's effective.
It's effective. I would not be, having worked with some of the most amazing agencies in London, New York and Sydney, I wouldn't be low to criticize agencies. So I know what a tough game it is, and I know how badly they're briefed in many cases, because I've been that person who wrote those crappy briefs. I wouldn't say that. I would just, one has to work hand in glove with them to go and get across that certain things we want. I'm what I call a commercial marketer. I'm driven by sales, I'm driven by revenues, I'm driven by numbers. I'm not what I call a pure brand marketer who's thinking about the brand 24/7. My first priority, it's what I'm hired for, is sell more stuff, okay? And if anything gets in the way of selling more stuff, it's my moral obligation to go and work out what that is. It could be friction. It could be the fact that we're not showing the pack shot till the final 3 seconds of the ad, but by any means necessary. And you've got to bring your agency along with them on that, because they may not be as commercially minded as you are, because they've got a slightly different agenda.
Should we do a couple of listener questions?
Get into it if you want. We'll see whether I can answer. That's a good topic.
So, asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us. So, we've selected 2 as usual, and we'll start with Bex. And it's good actually, because there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, both AI and your racing driver hat that you wear at times, and these come up in the question. So Bex asks, I know you're a big advocate of data-driven marketing and AI, even into the realm of creativity, as well as a keen racing driver. Would you watch motor racing if the cars were driven by robots?
Never in a million years. Not in this lifetime or the next. Yeah. No, it's funny. Like people always kind of
get off the fence. Colin.
This lifetime or the next. No, people always go and say, what about? The problem is I'm old school. My dad dragged me to motor racing when I was 4 years old, so I can't escape my past. So like the person at the theatre loving the roar of the grease paint and the smell of the crowd. I love the the smell of the engines, the noise, that's it. And if you've ever been to, say, not the current Formula One cars, but say some of the old school Formula One cars, and heard them rev and drive by you, it's such a visceral, emotional experience. Like a little tear goes down my eyes. I hear it.
Yeah.
The robo racing's never going to take off. You heard it here first, people. And you know, a lot of my kind of buddies are into motor racing as well. Obviously, Formula E is taking off as well, and I'm like a refusnik on the cars with no engines. So yeah, I'll have to kind of grow up a bit, I appreciate, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll throw in another question then. What do you think about the concept of auto-driving robot cars and all that?
Well, you know, when it comes to the street, absolutely, you can see that the writing's on the wall. I'm actually obviously a total hypocrite because I have 4 or 5 cars, all in various states of disrepair, but I cycle everywhere. You know, I mean, I literally cycle everywhere. I think the last time I drove my car was 3 or 4 weeks ago. So if you live in the city anywhere, the writing's on the wall in terms of all that sort of stuff, but it's still it's a good few years away because obviously it's the PR is ahead of the tech.
Yeah, and I think the other thing people overlook is when they make these predictions is that, you know, like yourself, people love cars. I mean, they don't always own 4 MGs, but people do love cars. They're playing with their cars. They save up for their cars. They're proud of their cars. You know, so to go into something a bit more autonomous and, you know, samey, just I don't see the logic. I see the logic in theory of it being a good thing, but I think in practice there's quite a few obstacles.
There's a great kind of riffing on this particular topic in a book called The Fall of Advertising and the Rise of PR by Al Rees, written around 2004. And I remember reading it, and he was talking through this concept that at the time I was like, I don't know what he's talking about there. But what he said, all things that were empty every day can eventually become art or become culture. And I was like, well, what is he really talking about here? And he used the example of a horse and cart. So in 1900, a horse and cart was an everyday thing. There was no particular value associated with the horse itself. They were sent off to the knacker's yard and boiled down for glue and so on. They were just not seen as a thing. But obviously cars came in, and now horses are prized items that cost a heck of a lot of money. Now, they're still the same thing. They're still a horse. What happened? Our worldview often changed, okay? And that's what's going to happen with everyday cars. Our worldview will change. They may turn into kind of art. Now, my new article for Marketing Week is talking about this particular topic, and it's called What's on the Edge? What's on the edge? And it's a lens on how to see the world and look at things and going, what's really happening at the edge of society? And I don't mean the literal edge, you know, that's seedy. I mean, just like things that are kind of bubbling under that you think, maybe, I don't know. And what's bubbling under right now with cars, as an example, is that they're more and more becoming art things, like classic cars and so on. They just sold a Ferrari there a couple of months ago for $70 million, whereas 10 years ago, that same car was $7 million. Okay. There's a lot of retro thinking about historic race cars, which is what I race as well. And then if you just extend that out and you say, what's on the edge? Well, then in 2009, I think it was, if you'd come to me and say, there's this little Lotus car, little sports car that's powered by a battery that can do 150 kilometers, and that company is going to become the most famous company in the world, you would just have laughed at me. I did laugh at it because I was like, well, that's a Lotus with a battery in it, and the car has been made by Lotus. Yeah, it looks like a Lotus, and not a very successful Lotus. And that company is Tesla, okay? And that same car is now floating around in space, and it's now worth more than Ford and GM and all together. So what I say is look at what's on the edge and go, could that really be possible? Is this the thing that's the early part of the adoption curve, and is it going to go mainstream? And so I'm using this as a lens for a lot of things, and obviously the example being right now, obviously known about climate change for a long time. We've known about waste and plastics for a long time, and it's been there in the background. It was on the edge, if you will, and now it's pretty much front and center, and people are now reconsidering their own use of plastic. They're considering flying, they're reconsidering everything. So look for the ideas that are on the edge and go, what would happen if that became mainstream?
There's some investment advice there.
Yeah, consult your broker before taking Colin's investment advice.
We'll run a caveat at the end of the
exactly,
show.
Yeah. Stocks can go up as well as down. Yeah.
So question 2, Mark says, I'm a copywriter. I am admittedly a Luddite, oft writing copy by candlelight in an old coaching tavern. That said, do you really think AI can truly produce not only effective copy, but more importantly, distinct copy with unique human wit? I'd worry that brand tones of voice would end up sounding the same.
So, again, we have to go back to answer this. I'll have to go to basics and definitions and so on. So, first of all, I happen to know a little bit about artificial intelligence because the company I work for has 10 guys and gals working on artificial intelligence, next best action, big data, whatever the buzzword du jour is, that area they're working on it. And I had to write a lot of white papers, and I really had to kind of deep dive and talk to the doctor who runs the whole division and go, what's really going on here? And so much about what's written about AI is either hype or variation about it's going to take our jobs, but most people don't know what it is. And AI is basically just things that require normal human intelligence, which is visual perception or speech recognition or decision making or translation. It can perform those tasks, okay? But the only way it can perform those tasks is if it has tons of data. And tons of data would be, in the case of a copywriter, he's got 1,000 ads with the exact results from each of those particular series of copywriting, and then the overall cut-through rate, conversion rate, whatever the measure is. And so, could AI replace copywriting? The answer is, I would never obviously say no, it's not possible. But if you take what it is could it do a lot more test and learn? Could it do a lot more improvement of what it is? At this moment, no, because you can even see the recommendation engines are not that smart. But the second thing I would then really argue is, and there's a very interesting book called The Creativity Code by Mark Ritson, who's much more erudite and much more articulate than me on this. But he talks about much of what we talk about being creative is copying or combining or synthesizing rather than sitting in the coaching in by candlelight. Now, I'm sure actually this is what this copyright is doing as well. But he talks about creativity being either combinatorial, which is mashups, combining different things that are unfamiliar. And the second one of type of creativity is exploratory, which is kind of using what's existing, what's possible, and just building on that. And he uses the example, say, impressionist painting, which built on previous styles. And then it's transformational creativity, which is total game changing, which is James Joyce writing Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, total breaks from the past. And Satellite quotes the particular professor Margaret Bowden that the first two types of creativity, which is sort of a version of copying or learning from the past, is 98% of what we call creativity. And they've done the research to prove it. So where does that leave our AI, right? Our copywriter who's possibly threatened by artificial intelligence? I can tell you hands-on, having seen the results of artificial intelligence live through what I'm doing in my day-to-day job, they can barely answer a decent question on customer service correctly at this moment. Okay, not because they're bad, it's hard. Yeah, it's just hard. And then you add in different culture, different eras, he's going to be employed for the rest of his life, which leads me to another point for any young people listening. The copywriting skill, the ability to write words, and the ability to understand language is the superpower of a marketer, because those words help you actually engage correctly with that copywriter. They also help you understand what language is, so you can actually go decide whether a heading, a call to action is correct. But it also makes you more articulate, and it makes you better able to get your ideas across as well. So copywriting is one of the superpowers of marketers in 2019.
Great answer, presumably very encouraging for Mark to hear. I know Mark, in fact, and he's a very, very talented wordsmith. So I think that latter point you've made about copywriters is incredibly accurate.
I would have to tell you that I didn't realize. I knew writing is difficult. We all know writing is difficult. We've all written projects, we've all written documents. But until you have to write a column every month for 4 or 5 years, that's when you realize, oh, this is a lot harder than people think. So, and then a double down. A copywriter is going to deliver copy that works by a certain deadline, rather than me, who likes to wait for the muse to come to him and come up with his crazy ideas.
Yeah, it's doing it on demand, isn't it? It's a whole different ballgame.
Total respect.
So the final part of the interview then, Colin, is our 4 pertinent poses that we put to all of our guests. So number 1, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Don't worry about it. Anything between the age of 20 and 25, it doesn't matter. If you want to go and learn surfing, Colin, go and do it. If you want to go learn motor racing, go and do it. There's plenty of time to work hard in the day job that you want. But make sure you start learning and loving to read books earlier rather than later.
So life starts at 26.
Pretty much. Serious careers start at 25, 26. I come from the generation where my mother and my father basically said, like, I know you finished, university, it's time to get a job. And there was no element of like, I just want to kind of like, what if I just want to go around Latin America and hang out? No. Get a job, get out and get a job. And actually, because I work in marketing, my mother still doesn't know what I do and is still waiting for me to get a job. Even when I did the MBA, like years after leaving, she's like, would you not get a job in the bank, Colin? Would you not just get a job in the bank? It's so much more safe. And then I have to discuss things like Lehman Brothers with her, and I kind of find I'm losing the argument.
I just love the idea of her waiting for you to get a job.
She's still waiting for me to get a real job. It's like, and then I look at her and I go, maybe I should.
Maybe I should, yeah. Colin, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Banish? I don't know whether to say platforms, like, banish Snapchat or something like that. I tell you what, it really just bugs me at the moment is I banish lazy thinking. If you look at this whole purpose-driven brand stuff, or the concepts around people talk about millennials and so on, it's just lazy thinking. It's like, just label it as millennials, and let's call it that, and then it becomes a thing, and then it develops its own head of steam, and you're thinking, this is it causes problems for those who work as professional marketers, because they got to unwind all these crazy ideas that people have picked up the whole time. No, we're not going to use the word millennials as a segment. No, we don't have a Snapchat strategy. That's not what we're doing here. So it's this kind of thing, lazy thinking. Get rid of lazy thinking. Stop believing your opinions.
Perfect. You've mentioned a few already, but number 3 is, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Read early and read often. I'll give you a great story. It's the only kind of vaguely political related kind of statement or kind of insight I can give you. Is I read a book when I was on holidays called Vanished Kingdoms by Norman Davis, who's a professor of history at Cambridge. And what is very interesting, he talks about all these kingdoms that have existed in the past that we no longer remember, such as the Burgundian kingdom and the Tolosa kingdom. But he also says on page 12 of that book, he says, there's no real reason for England to continue. He says, I think it's highly unlikely that England will continue in its current, or Great Britain will continue its current format. And this book was written in 2010. It wasn't a political thing. Yeah, it was just like, he had the insight to go and say, these things, nothing is that permanent. Yeah, and it was like, what I say to people is, read history, read wide, first of all. Okay, then what you want to do is get the depth in your existing stuff. So start off reading the basics here. Richard Rummel talking about good strategy, bad strategy. Reece and Traub talking about positioning. April Dunford writing about positioning. Assume you know nothing. Start reading the books, and it is amazing. You'll go, oh, I didn't. Now, you've got to do one thing, though, before you start diving into things. You've got to learn this concept called deep work by, I've forgotten the gent's name, but he's a writer in the States, where it's how to cut out distraction and how to stop, we're skimming across the top all the time. And I didn't become a good writer, and I didn't become a good reader to like cut out distractions. So until you do that, then you can't read books like Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, or Positioning by Reese and Tread, or Influence by Robert Cialdini, or obviously the aforementioned How Brands Grow, because it requires your brain to be in tune. You can't flick across the top.
I've not read that, but I've looked it up. It's Cal Newport.
Yeah, Cal Newport. It's worth reading because you'll do that thing with a book and you go, I kind of know this. And then they'll go, but I don't do this. There's actually, there's a guy called Stephen Pressfield. He's my favorite author, full stop. Okay. And he's got a book called The War of Art. The War of Art. And the second book is called Turning Pro. They're very easy to read. They're very simple. And to me, they're the core. They're the start. You read War of Art, and it basically is like getting cold water and pouring it over your head. Because he talks about this concept called the resistance, which stops you doing the work that you need to do. And so start with The War of Art and then Turning Pro, because if you're a pro marketer, you've read Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummel, you've read Positioning, you've read How Brands Grow, you've read Michael Porter's Competitive Strategy, you've read Choice Factor by Richard Shotton, you read blogs like Martin Weigel's blog, Canal Bank blog, you know this material. Yeah, and you can talk about it, and it's an ongoing discussion in your brain, an ongoing thought, and a lens that you can see through the world. Because that's what I call the T-shape bit. You're diving into a detail, and then you start reading wider, like around history, around sociology. You know, you should be reading *Sapiens* by Harari, because that gives you the context to understand humans and getting insight into people. Yeah, so read deep in your sole topic and then start doing wide on a lot of other topics.
Yeah, you're right. Doing some wider reading is hugely valuable.
Yeah, I mean, when I read, when I read Harari, it was like, oh, I thought I knew it. I don't. This is great. And it actually made me a better marketer. I just now work in the world through a totally different lens on that one book.
Perfect. So we always dedicate each episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest who has to give their reason why.
I'm going to dedicate it to the guy who gave me my first job in Thomas Cook, without which I wouldn't even be talking to you here. And he did it against the recommendations of everybody else in the business. And it turns out I got it by the skin of my teeth, and all that. Whole careers were built. So when I say to you, anybody listening here, you know, you're playing with people's lives when you recruit them, and you could be giving the break of their lives. So just think through that. That's what this particular gentleman, John Babister, did for me.
Perfect. Well, this episode is very proudly dedicated to John then. Thank you. My final call to action to everyone listening is that they can head over to this episode online. We've shared links to everything discussed and the numerous book recommendations. How else can people get more Colin Lewis?
I would have a look at the odd time I tweet on Colin A. Lewis, A as in A for alphabet, so Colin A. Lewis at Colin A. Lewis. And you can find me on LinkedIn because there's not that many Colin Lewises in the world, it turns out. I would like you to read my stuff in Marketing Week. Colin Lewis Marketing Week is the search you need to do. And if you really have plenty of spare time in your hands, you might want to go to colinlewis.me, my website that I keep needing to update all the time. But, you know, I do a lot of speaking stuff. You'll see me at the Festival of Marketing. And just realize that when I write these material, I'm writing for you and for me to learn more. So there's a lot of work put into it. It's not some random stuff I throw together. So when I'm writing, like I want you to think it through, and that's my only call to action for people here. Read my stuff because I've spent a lot of time thinking out, and I'm hopefully helping you on the way.
We'll add all of those links. So, Colin, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure and privilege to talk.
Listen, thank you so much, Giles. It's been great fun.
And thank you to everyone listening. Please continue to share and review. Keep the questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch with us, simply find Gasp online, check out CTA Pod on Instagram, or email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.